Our next speaker, James Gardner, heads up strategy at Spigit, which is a really cool company that is tapping into the wisdom of crowds to gamify social innovation. Welcome to the stage, James.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And it's wonderful to be here again at the Gamification Summit. The last time I did was in New York. And I want to tell you today about my experiences before Spigit, where we built some interesting systems that used some of the features of games to drive outcomes that made a difference in banking and in government. Well, I started out my career as an innovation scientist, and when I started studying this process of innovation, we were all about stage gates and processes and systems and everything you could do to make the process of creativity as rigorous and predictable as possible. Well, I joined this bank, and all my friends go, "I can't believe, James, innovation person, you are going to join a bank, because isn't banking oxymoron, innovation banking? That's an oxymoron. What do you think you're doing?" But this great British bank called Lloyds Banking Group decides that they're going to have an innovation program. And they decided that what they wanted to have was a program that would change the shape of banking forever. They were sick of having to compete on brand and compete on product, and all the products were the same. And they were sick of having to muck with terms and conditions and prices, and that was the only way they were ever going to make a difference. They said, "We want you to use an innovation program to reshape the future of banking." And my job was to create what's the newest thing I can think up today. The problem is that in banking, and indeed in many other industries, there are very rarely breakthroughs. There are very rarely anything that goes on that actually makes a big difference. And the fact is, in financial services, breakthroughs don't actually pay. And I was given this enormous innovation program, luxuriously funded, large numbers of people, and we set out to actually make this difference happen. Unfortunately, no matter how hard we tried, we were unable to make a substantial difference. And I got desperate. I was desperate because I knew that any minute now I was going to be fired, and that this would be marked down as one of the biggest failures in financial services innovation ever. So I was desperate, and I turned to the crowd. I thought, what if we deployed a thing that lets crowd-based people participate in this innovation problem? And so we built a tool that did that. Well, then all these managers showed up, and they were going, "No one in my team is going to do this thing where they're innovating. It's going to have to go outside office hours. You're going to have to make sure that they're doing it not when they're supposed to be serving customers or answering calls. And if you can't do that, this is not going to happen." This is the entire cadre of middle managers. And even individuals were saying, "You know, James, I don't really care about you and your program because innovation is not my job. I am here to sell products and serve customers." And again, we were desperate. And we turned to this idea of making innovation a game. Here's the game. It's called Innovation Market, and it has lots of classic features of the gamification style things that we've been talking about over the last 2 days. This was in 2006, and we didn't really know what we were doing actually with Innovation Market. We just put these things together and saw what happened. So it's a game, and you get paid a virtual currency every time you contribute an idea, and you get more virtual currency if you give votes, and you get more currency for giving comments and various other bits and pieces. And the competition is to be the richest person in the bank in terms of this virtual currency. Well, it kind of worked. People kind of liked this competition. But it wasn't until we tried some interesting new effects that we started to get some really interesting outcomes. It's boring, actually, just to compete on the basis of who is rich if all you can do is basically earn wages. And so we added an innovation stock market. And so now you could use your virtual currency to buy and sell shares in the ideas that you thought were excellent. And the game became, how can I spot the ideas that are great when the price is low and sell them when the idea's price goes high? And it started to take off. Well, emboldened by our success, we decided we would try an interesting experiment. What we decided to do was make the bank bean, the virtual currency that we created, we decided to make the bank bean transferable into cash. So if you earned a couple of thousand bank beans, you would then be able to transfer them into Great Britain pounds. And this had an electric effect. So first of all, being bankers, we would have expected to have understood some of the economic things that were about to happen. My rewards budget that I could pay these bank bean pounds out of was fixed. But actually, every time you click a link or put an idea in or make a comment, you're getting paid in this virtual currency. We created hyperinflation of the bank bean. We had an Argentina of bank beans going on, and the fact was people hated that. And as bankers, we were thinking, how could we have missed something so simple in this very basic game dynamic? You can't just create money. Well, we tried a whole pile of things to actually fix this. One of the first things we tried being bankers was, well, let's try bank bean taxation. So we start taxing people's virtual currency, and can I tell you an interesting discovery from that experiment? It is that virtual currency taxation is even more unpopular than real taxation. So I'm this terribly reviled person, and the system starts to fall to pieces a bit, but eventually we find a way of stabilizing the value of the currency. But then something interesting happened. We noticed that people were working on the ideas in this market. They were working on them so that they would know what was going on, so that they could release information selectively to the market to manipulate the price of the ideas. Well, firstly, I was concerned that I had an innovation program that didn't work, which we fixed. We got one that did work, but then I was doubly concerned because I'd actually created a situation where licensed bank employees were engaging in authorised insider trading, and I thought, this time I'm really going to be fired. Well, actually, before we shut this down, we didn't shut it down, we noticed something amazing, that this behaviour of games, in fact gaming the game, was driving people to work on ideas, and those ideas were going live. So the dynamic, the psychological dynamic of being able to cheat turned out to be the most amazing driver of value that you could imagine. People were working on ideas in their own spare time in order to win this game. So this made this program quite the successful thing. We had some really interesting innovations come out of it. I'll give you one example. We had these web teller things in branches, and they were basically not being used very well. Customers would go in, they'd fill in their mortgage applications, and then at the end, after investing all this time, they'd walk away. And we're sitting in the centre of our innovation program going, well, we don't know why, we'll get some web marketing person to fix this, and basically ignored it. But the people playing this game did not ignore it. They clustered together in order to win and told us, thousands of people told us, the reason you can't get the people to fill in the form is that the terms and conditions checkbox is not visible to anyone and they're walking away. And this massive coalition of people in the tool to play the game to win forced us to make the change. That change was worth multiple percentage points of new originations every month. And actually, we were getting 1,200 of those kind of ideas every single month, for which a significant percentage of the game played. It turned out to be a very profitable program. But actually, we learnt a few things. And the thing that we learnt is my first lesson, having built these things, and that is no matter how fun it looks, or no matter how much effort you put into these corporate sort of systems with game dynamics, it still is not a situation where you build it and they will come. We discovered after months of effort that we actually had to market and actively recruit users before we had enough people playing that this was actually fun to play. And it was an amazing learning experience for us. We'd assumed that just if we did something different, something that was a little bit unusual, that we would get our audience. We had to actually stand in building foyers and practically force people into this tool before anyone would do anything. Well, anyway, here are some of the leaderboards. You can see that people are competing on a number of different parameters. We have people competing on price, we have people competing on wealth, we have people competing on their reputation within the system. And all of this tended to work out very, very well. But the thing was that HR is a real problem. We coined this term at Lloyd's, that there were these fun pirates. And you have fun pirates anytime you mention the word game inside a bank. And the fun pirates immediately tried to shut us down. It was fine when we had a rewards budget when they were trading certificates, basically merit certificates. It was not fine when people were playing games to get these certificates. And time again, lesson number 2, we've learned, if you're going to build big enterprise systems, you cannot use the word game dynamic, you cannot use the word gamification. You have to say things like, we're going to build in psychological dynamics, or we're going to build in behavioural aspects before you can get all the fun pirates to ignore what you're doing. This is a fun pirate. This is a picture of my ex-boss, and she was irritated with this program because she said, we hired you to change the face of banking, and what you are doing is creating incrementalism everywhere. Please come up with an answer to our next big strategic challenge, which is phone companies are about to put payments chips inside their telephones. And when this happens, she said to me, what's going to happen is our entire credit card business is going to collapse. So with your luxuriously funded innovation program, you'd better come up with an answer. Well, my team and I put our thinking caps on and we came up with this. We argued, if phone companies are going to put payments chips in their handsets, we will put a telephone in your credit card. And we're so involved in the excitement of this entire program that we go and actually do it. You send off the specifications to China, and a couple of months later, back comes, beautifully done, prototypes of a digital credit card. And we are all over ourselves with excitement about it. It has a screen on the front. It even has the form factor that still lets you put it in the slot in the ATM, thumbprint reader down the side, and a little click thing so you can scroll through all your products with the bank. And we're going, gosh, aren't we great? This is the answer. But we, again, are bankers and not engineers. So we do not realise that actually when you're building electronics, it's nothing about the form factor. It's nothing about the fact that you can actually build a phone that can go into an ATM slot. It is everything about the battery and how long you have to go between charging this thing. And you can imagine in a credit card, the battery is microscopic. And so we market test this and we discover that actually consumers are not willing to plug their credit card into the PowerPoint every hour to make sure that they can actually buy stuff. We discover, in fact, that they're not willing to plug it in ever. But we're so involved in ourselves that even at this point, we don't go, gosh, this is a stupid idea. We go back to China and we go, our problem, market research tells us, is that people will not plug in their credit cards, so please provide us a solution which does not require anyone to plug in their credit card. And they come back to us with this mat. And you're supposed to put your mat, on this mat you put your handbag or your wallet, and it charges overnight by induction charging. Just like electric toothbrushes, you put it on the stand, it charges without contact. And we're going, now we have the answer. But of course, what we don't realise, being bankers and not engineers, is that you're charging the thing with magnets. And then naturally, you erase every other thing that's in someone's handbag or wallet. And while competitively we quite liked that idea, we knew that customers would hate it. And so we eventually thought, well, this is kind of a stupid idea, really, isn't it? We'd better abandon this after quite a lot of money was spent. But we still had our crowd, and we still had our innovation game. And we go to them, crowd, please tell us, we're about to have a phone system with payments chips in it. What is the answer to this problem? And they came up with this. This is a key fob. Because the crowd, playing our innovation game, correctly identifies that the key fob is the thing you have with you most of the time in addition to your phone. And inside the key fob is the payments chip. But when you push the button, what happens is you get your live account balance at this precise second. And I'm going, gosh, the crowd must be dumb. Because why can't they go to the call centre? Why can't they use the internet? Why can't they get the balance on the ATM? But we market test this. And it turns out that what people care about is being able to push the button and get the balance before they put their card in a merchant slot and get declined to much embarrassment. Innovation games with these game dynamics turned into an extraordinarily powerful driver of value. And we didn't even make these games very complicated. A leaderboard, some currency, some top trading, and it had this extraordinary effect on the fortunes of this innovation program. Well, anyway, moving on to about 2008, we have a financial crisis. And in Britain, there were at that time 5 great banks, 5 big banks, and 2 of them required government bailouts. And as a result of that, the bank I worked at became 48% owned by the British government. We also got this guy. This is our Prime Minister. And by the time he got into power, the cost of financing this massive bailout of the banks was so huge that Treasury was in serious trouble thinking about how it was going to pay for government services. So we were invited in our bank, basically part of the government at that point, to form an innovation program across government. And so I took my program, dumped it into government, became Chief Technology Officer of the UK, and we built exactly the same thing. Now, my friends are going, if you thought banking and innovation was an oxymoron, can you imagine what it must be like doing it in government? And I joined the British Civil Service, which is an institution with hundreds of years of background, and some of the people there are so uninnovative, unbelievably uninnovative. Some of them have not even discovered yet that Britain no longer has an empire. This is what you're dealing with. So I go there and he has this policy. We're going to use crowds to actually do better government. And so we discovered another interesting thing, which is that even when you've got a game, even when you're controlling behaviours through the psychology of gamification, you can still have some really big screw-ups. Basically, we put a system out there that asked government, the citizens of government, to tell us what are the top things you can do to save money. And they earned points, there was virtual currency, and they got to vote, and they did all the things. There were leaderboards. And what we didn't realise is that there is a very fine line between having a crowd and having a mob. What happened was, the crowd, these citizens, much more poorly behaved than we'd experienced inside the firewall, turned out to think it was very funny to put the Lord Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is this guy, basically the Treasurer. They said that the best way to save money in government was to put him in a custard bath. This was picked up by the media everywhere. It was a monumental embarrassment to everyone, and this idea that the big society could be a thing was resting on a pinnacle of failure. What we learned from that is that no matter how clever you are, and no matter what systems and dynamics you put in, cheating is going to happen, and bad behaviour is going to happen. And when you have these systems inside the enterprise, you get much better behaviour from your crowd than when you do outside the enterprise. Citizens are way more badly behaved than employees. Our lesson was, cheating is going to happen, you can't stop it, but in the case of Lloyd's, we were able to fake it in such a way that the cheating made it work for us. When we went to government, we didn't, and it really did not work for us. Well, from the government perspective, we started to wonder about what would it mean, actually, if we started to build these large crowd-based systems that exhibited all the game dynamics we'd started to work with, and we just made them free for anyone and opened them up to everyone, and we started to do this kind of thing. And this is a free tool that has recently come out that exhibits many of these behaviours and things that we've learned. This is Icon. Basically, instead of just proposing ideas and voting, you actually have to compare one against the other, and you do this for points, and the dynamic is you have to be on this leaderboard at the top, and there are these ideas around gifts and various other things that you can do. But the interesting thing is, what we learned is, because you're going to get cheating, because you're going to get bad behaviour, it's actually about crowd control and not about games at all. We've learned that crowds do not like to be censored, they do not like to be controlled. But when you try to build a system that does not include control, you get bad behaviour and you get the outcomes that you don't expect. And this is how we've dealt with that. You can see standard leaderboards and standard activities and various other bits and pieces here. This has proved to be quite successful, and 600 organisations signed up to make this work in the first month of operation. But it taught us another lesson. This is my fourth lesson today. And that is that these crowds that play games, they have cultures. They develop behaviours which may or may not be the same as the behaviours that they have in the enterprise generally, but that those behaviours get set in the first 100 people who are in the game. And actually, if you don't get the culture you want in the first 100 people, you're never going to get it again, ever. We have one organisation that uses this stuff that we've been building, and they have 250,000 employees. And they have a particular cultural artefact there, which is that it's okay to say something is fantastic, but it is not okay to say something is terrible. So by the time we worked this out, we had no way of changing that. There were 10,000 people, and they're all walking around in this tool going, it's got to be great, it's got to be great, it's got to be great. But we wanted them to say, this one's okay, but that one's terrible. So this culture thing turns out to be the most important predictor of success of these psychological dynamics compared to everything else. The last thing that I wanted to say about the things we've learned about these enterprise games is that actually they start out on a high and you get lots of people engaged, but they swiftly get super boring and people go away never to return. What we've learned is it's necessary to add an element of risk. In one of our tools we had this thing, which is you can actually contribute, but if you do contribute you have to stake your position on the leaderboard, and there is a way you can get it back, but you have to stake your position to play. And that turns out to be more exciting. In other games, we've had it that there are a certain number of prizes which you can buy in a various online store, and if you buy a prize, you get it, but when all the prizes are gone, everyone's points balance resets to 0. Our lesson that we learned was games without risk are extremely boring, particularly when what you are trying to do is get people to do work in the context of a game. The systems we've built have been so interesting and shown us so many interesting things. In particular, they've shown us that the game doesn't have to be flashy. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to have all of the game dynamics which are at all possible. But when you do these things, you can actually produce real-world outcomes that make a significant difference. This is what the game looks like in government. It's almost identical to the one that we had in banking. And here's the amazing thing. In government, I couldn't pay people for bank beans. In banking, I could. The system otherwise was identical, but in the end, the money made no difference because government realised millions of pounds of savings in a really short time, even though no one was getting paid to play. Then I went back to my experiences with the bank and I said, how many times did we actually have a cash out? How many times did we actually have someone say, I want that money? And some of them had bank bean balances which would have let them buy small cars or massive plasma TVs. The answer was hardly anyone ever cashed out because the intrinsic rewards from winning and from being seen to play turned out to be the greatest motivator of them all. Thank you very much for listening to me today.
Thanks, James. You should have given your fun pirate boss a custard bath. I don't know what the hell a custard bath is, but it sounds terrible. So we have time for 1 or 2 questions. If anybody, please come to the front.
I had a question about, so you were given the opportunity to build a game for government, but what about, the issue I'm grappling with is, how do you encourage governments to embrace something like this? Like, you're invited to do it, but how do you go to an agency, a government agency, a city, and kind of ask them if they to participate in something like this?
Well, this goes to my point about the fun pirates, and I will observe that most government employees are government employees because it is their nature to be fun pirates. So my answer to you is, don't tell them that you're doing a game. Don't even use the word game. By all means, certainly don't use the term gamification. Just say, I'm building a system that has these features. And by the time they work out that it's fun to use, they'll probably be fine with the outcomes they're getting.
Okay.
As you think about the 2 or 3 things in financial services that are really broken, can you think of some ways that gamification can help solve those problems?
Well, there's so much broken in financial services that I wonder if any one game is sufficient to resolve the difficulty. The thing that I would say on that is that actually, when you get these things right, you can create crowds to form, and those crowds themselves are extraordinarily powerful drivers of change. We have some examples of this in London, particularly right now, in this idea of peer-to-peer lending, which is the idea that basic banking operations can occur without the intermediary of a bank at all. That is a powerful crowd that is driving significant change in the unsecured lending industry in London. So my answer is, anytime you can build a thing that is fun to play And in financial services, if that results in a large number of people playing, that is an opportunity to drive change. Thank you so very much for your kind attention today. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you. Thanks again, James.